Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I want to kick off today's episode with a question. What comes to mind when you hear the word influence? Also, I'd like you to think about people who have influenced you in the past and what it was about their approach that you found persuasive. And also, who would you like to influence, and who have you influenced, and what was it about your approach that connected with them? All these questions are relevant because my guest today is an expert in the topic of influence. This has been her specialty and her passion for decades. So I'd love to welcome to my show, Elena Zucker. Elena, hi.
Hi, Meredith. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm delighted about the conversation we're going to have today because I am sure every single one of my listeners is eager to influence someone else or other people in their lives, including potential business clients or family members or friends. I mean, there's just no limit to the people in our circles that we want to influence. So before we jump into the many questions I have for you today, I want to introduce you to my audience. Elena is president of Elena Zucker Associates, a management training and consulting firm in Montreal. She's an expert, as I mentioned, in the area of influence, and she's the author of 11 books, including the bestseller, The 7 Secrets of Influence. She's recently published a new mini ebook called Influence, The 7 Big Secrets in 7 Little Minutes. Now, Elena's unique Secrets of Influence theory and training program were developed over a period of years from her extensive experience in sales, advertising, and marketing. And this approach helped her sell millions of dollars in products and services. And her program is now available as an e-learning package, and we'll talk more about that later. Elena, I would love for you to share a little bit more about your journey into this area of influence. What piqued your interest in the beginning and kept you sustained in your interest in it?
Good question. How long have we got? So, as I mentioned, I started my career in advertising in New York City in the, rough and tumble world of Madison Avenue. I did all that. And I was in the creative department and always having to come up with campaigns, lines, and it was very scientific some of the time. We would try A headline versus B headline and literally measure the sales. You can't get sort of much more targeted than that. But I've always been in sales, actually. I started selling encyclopedias door to door in the freezing cold winters in the suburbs right here of Montreal, which is my hometown. So, and then I managed other salespeople as well. And I've always been intrigued by this because, for many years, even though I was successful, it still was a mystery. It just seemed like, wow, I had such a lucky week or such a lucky day, or that person really liked me. And, I began to realize it was kind of none of that. And that it just seemed like some people either had this magic and others didn't. And I wanted to understand how, some approaches worked and some didn't. And so I was always kind of taking mental notes of, watching a salesperson or a sales manager in a meeting how did they do that? How did they qualify that prospect? And some things came together. I was after the advertising business, I went back to graduate school in organizational development, and to in a way to look at organizations holistically. And I was always still interested in this influence topic. And then when I was in academia, I had an opportunity to weave together my business experience with some academic discipline. And the first time that I was ever asked to teach this was very early in my OD career. And I was teaching at a university in New Jersey, and there was this little company in the town next to us called AT&T.
Mm-hmm.
This little company had very large populations and very big budgets. And they, I at the Women in Management program for AT&T headquarters a long time ago. And then they asked me to do a kind of not very structured, kind of like an OD session with some of their training managers who they kind of needed consulting for they needed sales skills for non-sales people, right? And, so we kind of called it in-house consulting. And really what they needed was the sort of courage and confidence and techniques, how to get their talents known by the user populations, which were all those hundreds of thousands of people out there in the AT&T system. So instead of being passive and waiting for, some division to say, we need a training program on X, they needed to be more proactive. And that just kind of wasn't in their DNA.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind of consultants and they didn't think they had to go after anything. Right. So that was the beginning. And then slowly I started to craft what became more of a structured program. I had this questionnaire, and quite honestly, Meredith, at the beginning, it was little more than a Cosmo quiz. It was just a bunch of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't very scientific at all, but it included asking people for them to assess themselves on certain traits and characteristics that I knew were present in good influencers. In a way, I was just kind of making it up as I went along. And it was interesting because, fast forward quite a number of years later, and, I created about a dozen training programs, actually, when I first started my business in New York. And that really was a kind of marketing strategy, because I found that just saying that, I'm a fresh new consultant with an OD degree and I can fix anything, nobody wanted to hire me. They didn't know what to hire me for. And I found that if I created programs that had the seeming answer to frequently articulated problems, they could sort of point and say, we need that.
Mm-hmm.
And so influence was one of them. I mean, I didn't expect it to be, like raise up higher than any of the others. But I began finding that it was very popular. And the population was very surprising at first, because it was IT people. And I mean, I never would have thought of going after that population, to be honest, but they're the most underserved population in organizations in terms of just interpersonal skills 101, as you know, listening, because they're underserved. I mean, technical professionals of which there are so many nowadays. Sometimes they work alone. Sometimes they're kind of grabbed to work on a team or a task force. And they're, I hate to generalize, but generally, not only are they not necessarily people oriented, much more task oriented, but really they may not have had any of these basic skills. So,
Mhm.
they'll get the next, they'll have to go to some intensive seminar for the next technical iteration of whatever it is they're
Right.
special.
Yeah.
Or if they become a supervisor, they might go in for supervisory skills. And yet, I mean, they could be, middle-aged and embarrassed at this point that they've never had anything that's so basic. So I
Mhm.
also want to say the influence program is very basic. It's not fancy because, I worked many, many years to make it simple.
I'm sure you did. And one of the things I want to kind of pause here and have you do for us, because I would like everybody to have a common understanding and a common definition of what do we mean by influence, because sometimes people associate that with a negative meaning, such as manipulation and or other negative terms. So in your mind, how would you define it and distinguish it from any of the negatives?
Good, good. Well, one thing it doesn't mean is having a lot of followers on Instagram. It's funny because I've used this word in my name of my book and my seminars for so many years. And now with social media, the word influencer is, kind of a big meme. And so what I consider to be influence is it's a skill. It's a set of skills that anyone can learn, practice, and master. Okay,
Mhm.
so that's the first thing. So what influence is it's a power to affect other people, affect their values, perhaps their behavior, or their attitudes. Now, the only way that you can tell that you've influenced somebody or a group is by their behavior, because that's the only visible evidence, right? So
Mhm.
you may not realize, I mean, people have influenced my attitude, and yet they'll never know because something went snap, as you influenced me last week, which I won't go into now. But it was a very big aha moment. So,
Mhm.
so let me just dispel some of those myths and misconceptions, because if you have I just always start out my courses this way. If you have a subconscious bad feeling about the whole idea and the enterprise of influence, you're going to sabotage yourself. You're not going to want to do it, because who
Mhm.
does? So first of all, I like to say that influence is a power, and like nuclear power or electricity, right? And it could be used for good or ill. And a lot of people have said, well, influence equals manipulation. And I think, as you mentioned, I think it's a big concern. And especially these days, we're bombarded by, you may not realize hundreds of thousands of attempts to influence us every day. It comes in on our feed. We have half an ear to the news, to the TV, offering us medicines for diseases we can't even pronounce. And uh, and there's this latest one for this female deodorant that I just have to change the channel. So a lot of this is, we are the subjects of other people's influence attempts. And this is why we need to understand kind of the structure and the process of influence. So in terms of manipulation, I like to look at this on two dimensions, if you will. So one of them is intent, and the other is effect. So as the influencer, I'm asking myself, are my intentions honorable? It's as simple as that, right? Is it
Mhm.
my aim to enlighten you, to give you some knowledge or some benefit? that I'm making you aware of that you haven't heard about before. And then, so that's on my side. And then the effect is, how is it over there? Do you feel used or manipulated or had, or do you feel that you've gotten something, some benefit, some reward, some education as a result of our exchange? And so if I can look at, and influence happens one person at a time.
Mhm.
We can talk about groups another time, and I'll give you a kind of fun example. So those are the ways that I kind of dispel that idea of, interestingly, the Latin roots of the word manipulation are skillful handling, mano, right? And so you're handling it skillfully, and you need to decide whether it's, moral, ethical,
Mm-hmm.
holding a powerful tool if
Mm-hmm.
you know how to do it.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important point that you're bringing up. Actually, the two, both looking at intention and effect. And I think what often happens when we're trying to influence someone, we're really trying to control them. We're trying to get them to agree with the point of view that we have or do what we want them to do. And I think that that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. And your question about looking at what is my intention, I think is really important, because if it's to get my way, that may not be a legitimate reason to try to influence someone. And the effect that I have on them could be resentment, resistance. There's a lot of negative things, because I think what you're really getting at is making me think about how people can really perceive and they read us if they sense that we are trying, if we have an ulterior motive, if we're really trying to manipulate them, versus that the real genuine influencing someone's thinking, someone's behavior. And you were referring to us last week. One of the things that just hit me as you were referring to that is, I wasn't trying to convince you of something. I asked you a question. And that to me is a kind of an aha as we're talking about this. The idea that asking questions skillfully can be a very powerful way of influencing someone. Could you speak to that?
Almost exact. So yes, indeed, because let me just sort of say a little bit about the structure of the program. And obviously, in this short interview, we're not going to have time for me to go into the details. But basically, as I said earlier, I came up with, at first was just a kind of quiz. And then a big company, American Express, wanted to use it all over the world in their offices. And I thought, oh my, this is not, it's not ready for prime time. And so that's almost, I have to say that almost all the improvements that I've made in various courses and aspects, came because a client wanted something. And so hired some people who were psychometric psychologists and explained the basic skeleton, these basic points I wanted people to look at in themselves. And they created this wonderful influence styles inventory, which is 55 questions. And it's a self-assessment. It can also be used by bosses and peers, but that's another matter. And so what people end up with is their influence score over a spectrum of 6 types. And the crazy thing is that I really had not studied the Myers-Briggs program very much when I had this new questionnaire created, and yet people have told me that it's very congruent with the Myers-Briggs, which I don't think it was. I mean, it wasn't intentional. It just, that's how it happened. So, but the basic principle, Meredith, is that the very first part of any encounter is listening and asking, questions, not only qualifying questions, is this person going to buy? Do they have the budget? I mean, you get to that later. But the most important thing is, what are they about? What do they want? What's missing? I mean, often it's the what's missing that they might be open to your help with, as you know. And the same is true for companies as individuals, right? So the most important, I believe, first step, and in fact, that's, the components of one of the styles we call welling or catalyst, because this is someone, now I have to qualify and say that no person is a type. Each style is a cluster of behaviors that, we just use by default. And what I wanted to investigate is, well, is his default setting so successful that he's, getting everybody to agree with him or to buy what he's selling? And, what I found is that we almost all have one or two default settings, but we're kind of missing out on the full spectrum of how much more effective we could be if only we kind of opened ourselves to learning, let's say, the other five. Okay. So like I just named them at first because they were rhyming names. I literally wrote a poem, and it was these words were welling, selling, etc. They all ended in ing. And then I thought, oh, maybe I should give them a name that sounds a little more corporate. I mean, I'm just kind of sharing how, I just made all these improvements by myself with very talented teams always, So I'll give you a little example because a lot of people ask me about how do you influence a group. So would you like me to just do that?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. So let me just grab a little water. So I mentioned AT&T, and, I got to know them very, very well, and their culture. In fact, one guy said to me once when I said I had to, I would send him something for my office in New York, and, they were in New Jersey. He said, oh, I thought you worked here in the building. He said, you have such a bell-shaped head. Now, that was a very big compliment in that system. You have to learn the syntax of a company, and that was like a huge compliment because he thought I worked, within the company because I knew the culture so well by this time. But still, I was invited by a committee to present one of my training programs for use in, I don't know, a whole bunch of populations within the system there. And, over the years, I've never really spent much time on these RFPs from government agencies because, bigger companies have a whole staff that just does that. And I always found it so time consuming and so risky, frankly, because, what they're looking for, and often they're looking for the cheapest thing. And, it's just, so, but anyway, this, it seemed like I had a very good chance because, I was known in the system for being, effective and being tuned to their needs. So they invited me to come to a meeting. I'm sure everyone listening can relate to this, right? And it was almost like an audition casting call. There were, this little waiting room for the vendors. And, there were maybe, I don't know, like 6 or so different people, different presentations. And we probably knew each other, like 3 of us or so. Because, even in New York, it's kind of a small world, training, development, OD. So they had sent this big, thick binder, big white binder with, sections that had blue tabs with all the criteria they wanted, how many interactive exercises and, how many pages in the participant workbook, like all irrelevant things, quite honestly, right? As we know. But anyway, so when I arrived, and we had 45 minutes each, and someone carelessly had left a flip chart from an earlier vendor somewhere out in the hall. Anyway, it was crazy. But so I prepared half a dozen white binders with blue tab sections to give to each of these committee members. And, because I knew they would feel so comfortable because that's what they had given out. But, when you walk into a room like that, you don't know if these 6 people sitting behind, like this dais, how that is, right? In a basically a classroom in an office building. You don't know, I did not know that whether these were the people who had written that called for proposals.
Mm.
And probably weren't, because this was 5-6 months later. And in companies like that, these committees move around. So I took a deep breath and I used almost 10 of my 45 minutes to read the room. And a lot of people are shocked that I would do this because, you have only precious 45 minutes. But that 10 minutes was so rich, full of information for me, because I asked them each before we start if they would just, say their name and what really, like, what's your real job, like what department do you come from? Because they're not the committee is not like full-time. They grab people from different departments and disciplines. And so, number one, you get to hear their voice. Is it a strong voice, or is it like a little little child girl voice? You get to see who defers to whom in the group, like what's the pecking order among these 6 people. And I asked them, what are your criteria? What would cause you to purchase a program? Is it interactive learning? Is it case studies of your very organization? I don't know, whatever. I had a little list. And I looked to see who answered and then who non-verbally agreed with that answer. So, you have to have good vision and be kind of quick and experienced to do this. But by the time I got to presenting, I even threw out whole sections because it didn't seem like high priorities to this very group. And so, I always tell this story. So P.S., I did get the contract, by the way. So, but I do tell this story because without reading the room, you're just nowhere.
Yes. Oh, Elena, that is such an important point. No matter, a lot of my listeners may not be directly in sales, like in the sales department, but we all have to sell our ideas to other people. And what you just said in that really wonderful story and the powerful lesson to extract from it is it's well worth your time to invest in learning more about these people before you jump in to try to influence them to your way of thinking when you don't have a sense of where they're coming from, what's important to them. You're really starting at a disadvantage.
Right. I mean, these are strangers. How are you going to know what to emphasize? And so then when I made certain points about what was contained in my program, I think it was the influence, I can't remember, but I looked at the person who had expressed a particular criterion and, made eye contact with that one. So, I mean, it's not that hard. This is not rocket science,
It's
as we say.
becoming aware, though, and raising your awareness. If you don't even know that this is a thing that you can
I,
do, that you can learn, then you can just kind of stumble along doing the best that you can, not realizing there's another opportunity here that
exactly.
you just haven't even seen because you weren't aware of that possibility.
And that, what you just said, applies to the styles, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I'll give you another example. Another style we call gelling. Also idealist. As I said, I gave, a corporate uh, uh, alias to each of these rhyming, welling, selling names. So the gelling style is also called idealist, and this is someone who is puts their whatever they're influencing about into kind of emotional language or a vision of a brighter future. You could think of Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream.
Mhm.
Um, so it's always about a brighter future. And, that tends to be a lot of people ask me, so what's your style? I don't know, because, I invented this. But I think my default style is the gelling, is, the big idea. However, someone whose dominant style, I'll give you an example. My brother is a mathematician and an economist. And, he he can only take something in if it has evidence, data, and proof.
Mhm.
I mean, that even goes, I remember I had this house in California and I had paid a lot of money to have it designed and decorated. And he said, I don't know, one thing about, that part of the roof is a little uneven, right? And so this is a style. We call this the felling style. And it's not bad. I like to teach people that it's not personal. It's not about you at all. It's just that they cannot help seeing the flaws. And you can have people like this on your side to help you make something better, more perfect,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So if they seem resistant, uh, what I like to do, for example, is sit on the same side of a table with that person, if that's someone I'm trying to influence, and present things as a draft so that we can perfect it together.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
anyway, point I'm making, yeah.
I wanted to just share, I am more like you on the gelling idealist side. I am married to a mechanical engineer
Okay.
who is very much like your brother, right?
There you go.
I mean, he was a residential builder. All the little details have to add up, and he's uh, very skilled at seeing the things that don't jive, that aren't right.
So,
And what I've learned after 42 years of marriage is when I want to influence him or get, first of all, I don't go in trying to make him, be a particular way. But I've learned if I am too enthusiastic and emotional, it's a turnoff. And so I've just learned for him to be able to hear me, I I need facts, I need more data, just like you said. And it's understanding what he needs. And I think that's the key thing that we need to recognize with these differences that you're talking about with the styles. It is a pattern that a person either was born with or it's something they've developed and is a part of them over time that requires being respectful of and not frustrated by because of the difference, but appreciating those
exactly.
differences.
When you were saying, like, the more enthusiastic and emotional you are, it is a turnoff, because, like, to them it just sounds like too much fluff, or you know
Not thought through.
exactly. So it's just, now the other thing I want to mention, though, about the styles, is that one very important aspect is awareness, is to become conscious. And
Mhm.
this in our chat yesterday, that while people take the questionnaire and it's really fun to learn about me, we all want me, that's just a starting point, because if you are weak in certain of the styles, that the style is not a description of you as a person. You're not a type. Those are simply your default fallback behaviors. So each style is a cluster of behaviors that you've learned over time.
Mhm.
Well, maybe we all do the best we can, and maybe that is because you may not have been aware there were other ways to operate. It's kind of like lazy muscles, right? Like if
Mhm.
I've always gotten by being excited about ideas and selling, someone's going to be excited. May not be everyone, right? But that's my experience. Someone is going to be excited. Maybe they're a needle in a haystack. um, but to understand that I could be excited, stay excited, but then be in the shoes of someone who's an engineer or a mathematician
Mhm.
and needs the information packaged in a different way,
Yes.
right? And so I have not used those muscles. Maybe I've been too lazy to do the research or get the data, because, it's much more fun to have an idea and let someone else work out the practicalities, right? So in a way, it is like helping people understand that these are, underused muscle groups, if you will, and they're
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
so we don't necessarily label somebody as a Welling or as a. It's just that this is all you've been able to come up with so far,
Yeah.
right? And there are other behaviors, if you even knew what they were. Some people, it's a big aha just to learn that these can be separated out.
Yes. And, as I'm listening to you, key thoughts coming to mind is we tend to judge others against how we are. And so
Exactly.
we have a tendency to say, well, my way is better or I'm right, as opposed to staying open and realizing there's validity in all the different ways that people are being. And if we aren't willing to understand where somebody is coming from, it's really going to limit us as an influencer. Circling back to what we're talking about here, if I truly want to have a positive impact on others, what's required of me in order to be whatever way is called for in this situation? And of course, we're not talking about compromising values or anything
Good. I'm
important.
glad you said that.
Looking at
It's
what is
packaging.
it allow us to connect, what might get in the way of us being able to connect, and how can I take personal responsibility to raise my own awareness to be available
Exactly.
to that person in a way that's going to help them understand where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. And I was thinking, someone asked me, again, when people ask you questions, you sort of, if you're thoughtful, you just sort of. So someone was asked, what are the most important single things you've learned? Like, I don't know, first when I learned how to solve something in algebra, or, I mean, and one of the major things I remember was, and I learned a lot about NLP. I was not a certified practitioner, but I did a lot of those trainings in New York with those original guys.
Mm.
Um, so, we all stand on the shoulders of other people who came up with theories before us. And,
Mhm.
I'm not an academic. As you can see, I'm a very, very practical person, although, I have had that education in OD. But, my best education, as I think I have it on one of my bios, is that I have a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks in New York City. And, you know, I lived there 25 years and ran a business there. So you learn a thing or two.
You sure do.
And so, but uh, some of the principles of NLP are directly related to what, you know, later became my influence theory. And with your know where a person is coming from, you know, that first step is getting rapport. And, you know, you cannot, which is what I was aiming for when I took my, excuse me, took that 10 minutes out of that 45 minutes of that group, because I had not established that it's kind of a foundation. It's not guaranteed you're going to succeed once you establish rapport, but you pretty much are not going to if you don't do that first step.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And before we wrap up, I do want to ask you the kind of the burning question, because you have this, you know, 7 secrets, and yet you talk about 6 styles. So there's something else there. What's the 7th one?
Well, you know, we've been talking around it, but it's very, very simple. So, as I said, we love learning about ourselves and what our own style is, what our own score is. You know, people love that. But really, the typology of 6 influence styles gives us a prism through which to observe the other people, to find out. Now we have some language, we have some names as kind of shorthand for describing this cluster of behaviors that the person is using. So I don't say what they are, it's what they're using, right? So there are 6 styles, and good question. The 7th secret is it's kind of an Uber principle. And the idea is that whatever your own style is, the first step is attentiveness. That influence equals attentiveness. And that is, as you're saying, the listening and observation. And it isn't necessarily passive, it's asking questions to learn more. That's still part of it. You're just eliciting it if it's not obviously apparent. And then flexibility. You know, E equals A plus F. Influence equals attentiveness and flexibility. And as you so wisely said, the flexibility, you do not need to change anything about your values or what it is that you're proposing. It's really just packaging it in a different way. So, 2 extreme examples that we both cited, you know, are the very numbers, evidence, facts, and figures oriented, and the very creative, emotional type. And so whatever type or whatever style is your preference one, what's more important is to ascertain what the style might be of the other. And as I say, once you learn, you know, basically these 6 words and what behaviors are clustered in each one of them, then you kind of have like better radar. I call it like having 3D glasses, because the way people talk, and, you know, the way people used to write letters, remember a letter? You'd like open it. Even the syntax, it's a little harder with text, quite honestly. But, you know, if you can get somebody in a Zoom call or in a one-to-one meeting, it's a lot harder on the phone. But still, you can still pick up cues, the kind of words. And one of the things we teach is what kind of words mean what kind of styles. But clues are there all the time. They're right there in front of your nose, but we just didn't know how to sort for them.
Yes. So, Elena, as we wrap up, I would love for you to share, how can people connect with you? learn more about the programs you offer, because I know there are going to be some of my listeners who are eager to go deeper with what you're talking about.
Okay, so these will be in the show notes also, right? Okay. So my website is easyinfluence.com, pretty easy. So it's EZ, the letter, number 4, letter U, at easyinfluence.com. That's the domain. And my email is easy4you at easyinfluence.com. So I hope that's clear. Easy Influence is the website, and then the email for you. And then when you're on the website, and we can put that direct link in the show notes, I'm going to send a link to the e-learning program, and it has the headline, Become an Influence Winner. And we'll put that in the show notes. And so that's the e-learning program, which is available off the shelf. And you'll see the whole description there. It basically contains 12 modules, and it was designed in Moodle, created by a team of educational technology experts. So it's very interactive, and it contains most of the exercises that are in the one-day live program. So if anyone's with a company and they want a live program, best to reach out to me and we can discuss that on a one-on-one. Okay, so, and then of course, speaking engagements, I do that as well, but I really prefer, going a little deeper, because we've, barely scratched the surface here, and it's almost an hour.
I know. So,
and the last thing is, I have a free gift, and that is a booklet called Influence Defined. And it's a poll, a survey that I did among fellow LinkedIn members. And it's asking, what is your take on influence? And then, we compiled all those answers. And then a little bit of what we discussed earlier about manipulation, what influence is and what it isn't, is in that booklet. So it's free for anybody who wants it. You just go to the website, easyinfluence.com/free-booklet.
Great.
I'll send you the.
Sure to include that too.
Yeah.
Elena, thank you so much. You are such a wealth of wisdom around this topic. And I didn't oversell you at the beginning saying this is a passion and expertise of yours, your enthusiasm for it, and the deep understanding you have of its importance and the way you convey that. I just admire and appreciate so much your being me today.
So, whoever, by the way, if people have any questions, this is important, about anything I said, if it was confusing, happy to, clarify that. Just shoot me an email and I'll answer you.
That's great.
All right. And thank you for your good questions and your attention, and for inviting me. I so appreciate the invitation.
Well, you are so welcome. And thank you for the way you've enriched my listeners today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, my dear. You have a wonderful day. And everybody have a great day. I hope you learned something. One thing would be great.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.